welcome back, and let's dive back into that topic of difficult conversations. So today we're going to speak about some mistakes that you might be having when having your difficult conversations. Or maybe even before you have your difficult conversation, there might be some things that you are avoiding. So let's dive straight into it. Number one, I feel like some people tend to avoid these conversations. Now, last time we spoke about fear and anxiety, and obviously that is enough to keep us stuck or keep us from saying anything. But I really want to encourage you to dive a little deeper here. Look at what is holding you back. I gave some tips in the last video on how to do that, but just to remind you to look at the emotions that come up for you when you start thinking about having these difficult conversations. I then want you to think about how your thoughts are influencing these emotions. So start diving a little bit deeper into your thoughts. And remember, you can keep asking yourself, what other thoughts are there? Are there any other thoughts that are connected to this initial thought? And you can do that same process with your emotions. What am I feeling? What else am I feeling? And just keep going down and down and drilling it down until you come to absolutely no answers. And when you've written that down and had a look, there'll be some little gems that you can pull out of there for yourself to understand why you are avoiding this conversation. Obviously, the outcome of our thinking and feeling is we don't take action. And I really want you to consider, if I continue to keep quiet in this situation, I'm going to continue feeling the way I'm feeling. And how is this going to impact this relationship? And I'm almost certain that this conversation that you're wanting to have is with somebody that you value, or a relationship that you want to have a little bit more relaxed or at peace. And so spending some time exploring the avoidance here is really important. So what are you avoiding? Number one. Number two, I want you to begin to think about, when you're going into this conversation, or even before you go into the conversation, what can you take ownership of? As humans, it's easier to blame because we don't really want to take responsibility for anything, because sometimes that is a little bit uncomfortable. But spend some time reflecting on, what is my part to play in this situation? We always have a part to play. Like I said in my last video, it takes two to tango. And so see where you can step out of blame, see what you can take responsibility for, and see what really needs to be spoken about. And this is an important step before you have your conversation. What is the real issue at hand here? It's not the 10 things that this person has done wrong. There might be one core element of that that is really getting under your skin, that is really upsetting you. So by drilling it down, understanding your thoughts, understanding your feelings, understanding how that is influencing the way that you show up, understanding that I need to take ownership for part of this conversation is really important. And these processes and opportunities to reflect creates that preparation for the conversation. So the next point I want to share with you, point 3, is not being prepared for a difficult conversation. Like I said in the last video, it is not just about diving in and sharing how you feel full of emotion at the wrong time of day. So really looking at being prepared for this conversation. And by looking at your thoughts, your feelings, your action, your ownership, and knowing what you want to say, because that clarity will come through that reflection, you'll be able to have a conversation that is succinct and to the point, and will get your message across without over-explaining. So the next thing I want to share is, when you go into this conversation, make sure that you are cool, calm, and collected. You need to be centered yourself emotionally before you engage in such a conversation, because when there is heightened emotion, the other person is going to feel that. Emotions are contagious. And we want to go into this conversation feeling really relaxed and really centered, navigating that anxiety and fear, because it is going to be there. I'm not saying these conversations are easy and you're going to have absolutely no anxiety. They are filled with anxiety. So really centering yourself, finding those tools to help you. And in my next video, I'm going to share those tools to help get you centered for these difficult conversations. So going into the conversation emotionally regulated. And the thing is, if you begin to start to work with your emotions, you will begin to understand that when you start feeling the rising up of anxiety and fear, or maybe there's a bit of defensiveness that's come into play, or you're feeling irritated or angry by what the other person is responding with, you can emotionally regulate yourself within that moment, or tap out for 2 minutes just to say, I'm just going to grab myself a glass of water, and then get yourself nicely centered. So really important is another step is emotional regulation, and watch out that you are not being emotionally escalated. Okay, so keeping yourself cool, calm, and collected. The other point is not listening. So I often find with my clients and people in general, when it comes to conflict resolution, and please, this is not a conflict conversation, more of a sharing of what is not working for me, how I'm feeling, or my needs. But generally in these kind of conversations, I find that people do not listen, because active listening is a skill. And often we find ourselves going into a space of wanting to answer something that they've said, or wanting to comment on something that they've said. So we're not actually listening to the words that are coming out of their mouths, because we are so wanting to say our own thing that we're not hearing what they're saying. We might get emotionally triggered, and when our emotional brain is at play, our higher order thinking brain, this beautiful prefrontal cortex here, has packed its bags and it's moved out, because the emotional brain takes over, and then we're not using our higher processes, like really actively listening to what that person has to say. If you are somebody that maybe forgets quite easily because you get caught up in the conversation, sometimes I do. I really want to say something, and then I say, oh, I want to say something, and I forget, is to maybe say, I'm just going to jot down any points that you might mention that I want to comment on. Is that okay with you? Are you comfortable with that? And in that way, you won't forget what you want to share. But really, I want you to try and practice. I want to encourage you to practice active listening. It is a really, really important skill to have for any engagement, any of our conversations. Be very careful not to generalize. And so this is why this reflection process before you go into the difficult conversation is important, because we can share sweeping statements or comments that can trigger the other person or make them get defensive, and that's not what you want, because we don't want the conversation to escalate emotionally. We don't want that defensiveness to come out. What we really want is for that person to hear how we're feeling, and not hear the defensive triggers that they keep going into. So it's really important not to generalize. Be specific. And that, I'm going to go back, I went off track a bit there, but understand exactly what it is you want to say, and even write it down before you go into this conversation. Be very clear. Do not over-explain, because in that over-explaining, in that opportunity where you are generalizing or throwing out sweeping comments, that person might get defensive. So be very clear, keep it short, to the point, one thing. Okay, that is why it's important to drill down your thoughts and your feelings that are going on for you in this situation, and what ownership you can take ownership of. So really understanding what it is you want to say, so you don't go into that overgeneralizing explanation. You know exactly the specific thing that you want to share with that person. So lack of empathy. Now, empathy is something that I think is lacking in this world today. I think because we have been through so much, we've gone into the self-preservation space where we are taking care of ourselves, taking care of our own, using whatever energy that we have left to do that as well. So there's almost like this feeling of, I don't have capacity for other people, and that's also okay. If you don't in that moment, at that time, while you're going through something difficult. But when you come out of that and you're able to offer empathy to somebody, it is so healing and so powerful, both for yourself and for that other person. So in a difficult conversation, I want to encourage you to tap into that empathy. And empathy is not sympathy. Classic South African saying is, "Ach, shame, I'm sorry." How many people, or how often do you say that? I tend to sometimes find that I do that, and I go, don't do that. That is not empathy. You're not showing empathy in the situation. So I want you to encourage you to tap into the empathy. And that is, I don't know this experience that you're going through. I don't know what you are going through, but I certainly understand the emotions attached to that. All right. We don't have to have experienced that thing that person's experienced to be able to show them empathy. Yes, we'll have a deeper understanding of the experience if we have gone through that, but we have at some point experienced an emotion that's connected to that. So I use the example of loss. Maybe somebody has lost a parent, and you've lost your dog, and I know that might seem, I don't like to order rank suffering, okay, but loss is loss. Heartache is the same. You know, we are going through the phases of grief. We are going through losing something. So that is how you show empathy. So in this conversation, tap into your empathy. You know, tap into that emotion that other person is experiencing. For me, empathy is, I hear you, I feel you, and I see you. And just that acknowledgement can go such a long way. So really utilizing the power of empathy in this conversation. Try not to interrupt. So this goes along hand in hand with your active listening. Try not interrupt that person, because they may have this thought process, and they may be coming around to understanding where you're at, maybe a little bit off topic or off whatever you're saying. But then I want you to say, I'm going to jot this down so you and I can chat about it further. That is really, really important. The crux of difficult conversations is to acknowledge the other person, even if you feel like they are in the wrong, because they may not even be aware that what they are doing is impacting you the way that it is. So it really is a starting point to say, this is how I feel. You do this, it makes me feel a certain way. I really want to be able to sort this out, because I value our time, I value our friendship, I value our partnership, but this situation does not make me feel okay, and I want to know how we can sort it out. It's important to share that it is a dual expectation, like we are going to sort this out together. It's not a case of it's your problem, you need to sort it out. What can we do to work together to make the situation better? All right. And the very last thing I want to share with you is there needs to be a follow-up conversation. And it doesn't have to be this big sit-down conversation. It can just be hey, how do you feel about the chat we had last week? Are there any thoughts that may have come up for you? It's really important for me that we are cool and okay. We value these relationships we have these conversations in. These conversations can be had with anybody, with your partner, with your children, with your parents, with your boss, with your work colleagues. If it is handled in the right way, it can have the most beautiful outcome. It is not to say that the person on the receiving end is going to receive it in the way that you hope, but I do know, like I said in the last video, when we drop that pebble in the water, there is this ripple effect that happens. And sometimes we have to drop a few pebbles in order for that plant that seed to be planted, and for the germination process to happen. So when they start actually realizing that this situation between you and them is not actually working. So I'd love to know your thoughts on difficult conversations and what I've shared here today, or maybe any other points that you've utilized or realized in your difficult conversations that have worked well. Because in my space, we are all here to learn and grow, and I learn so much through my clients and the ladies in my membership. So share any comments below. I'd love to hear from you. I hope those tips have helped you, and we'll see you next week on YouTube.